In this video, guys, we're going to be talking about 3 things that all field hockey players should be looking to include in their training programs. These 3 things are super specific to hockey. They're going to help you with performance. They're going to help with reducing the risk of injury. And they're going to be the most relevant to the majority of hockey players. Now, I'm just going to caveat this by saying that most of the time it's important to have done a full screening process and to perform a more individualized program. But just at a high level, these are some of the things that anyone can do that's going to make a significant impact on not just their performance, but their injury risk and also just their general health, well-being, and performance. So the very first thing that all hockey players should look to include is sprinting. Now, you might think hockey includes loads of sprinting, so why do more? Well, a lot of the GPS research would show us that because you're carrying a hockey stick, because you're changing direction, because you're responding to lots of different unplanned changes of direction like the opposition, and the fact that you're going to have fatigue in the training sessions and the games that you're playing in, you don't ever actually reach max speed. You're actually probably going to reach more like 90% of your top speed. So that 90 to 100% intensity, where the majority of the stimulus is going to come from, probably isn't going to be reached in the game, and it might be infrequent if it does happen. But when it does happen, obviously the impact on the game is massive. It's going to be something like a counter attack. It's going to be sprinting back into position. It's going to be something really, really significant like that. So really, really important that we include sprinting. So how do we do it? Well, frequently. That's the most important thing. Frequent small doses every single week is the key to ensuring the impact on sprint performance and also on injury risk as well. Now, a really good opportunity to do this every single week is in the warm-up. So you've obviously got an opportunity, possibly 2 to 3 training sessions per week and a game on a weekend, as an example. You've then got 4 opportunities to perform max effort sprinting. Now, as we know, in the game, you're not going to reach top speed. So before the game, in the warm-up, this is a great opportunity to do so. So you could be doing things like rolling 20-meter sprints, cat and mouse sprints of the partner. It could be some sort of acceleration, deceleration component. There's lots of ways we could do this, but consistency is key. So usually I would say 2 to 3 max effort sprints with full recovery between is more than sufficient to hit that stimulus every single week, once, twice, maybe even 3 times a week, depending on the volume that you've got going on. What it's going to do is, 1, prepare you for the upcoming event. So if that's a training session, if that's a match, you're going to have had that stimulus, so your body is fully prepared for the highest intensity it's ever going to achieve on the pitch in terms of the loading and the movement velocities you're going to experience. It's also going to prepare you long term because you're going to get exposure to top speed. And simply by getting exposure to max effort sprinting, you're going to generate and improve your speed over time. So you need that kind of consistent thing, that consistent theme, every single week. So a couple of times a week within a warm-up as part of training sessions before games is the best way to do that. 2 to 4 max effort sprints over a 20-yard, 30-yard distance with usually something like 10 seconds recovery per 10 meters. So you might have something like a 30-meter sprint, 30-second recovery, and then you do it 2 to 4 times. Now, if you, in an ideal world, if you had longer, you would have full recovery. So that would be something like a minute per 10-meter sprinters. So if you did a 30-meter sprint, it would be a 3-minute recovery. But in reality, if you're going before a training session, you're going to need to get through them in a shorter period of time. You're not going to have the luxury of full recovery. So usually something like 30 to 60 seconds per sprint would be adequate, building up to that 90% of your max speed throughout the sprints. Now, the most important thing when it comes to sprinting is obviously being warm prior to this. So doing prep work with mobility, movement prep, and then doing technical sprint drills and plyometrics to prepare for high effort sprinting is the key. So making sure that you're doing a movement prep sequence, looking at hip mobility, ankle mobility, looking at preparing your hamstrings, preparing the adductors, preparing the glutes for max effort sprinting, then doing some sort of technical work, like A skips, B skips, straight leg runs, incorporating plyometrics that are going to incorporate and focus on a short ground contact time, things like pogos, single leg pogos, lateral bounding, linear bounding, things like that. And then incorporating towards the end of the warm-up then max effort sprints before you go into the main session or the game. So you can kind of use that flow. And I've created lots of articles, short videos around this topic about how you prepare for a warm-up, how you complete one. So that would be the kind of theme for a sprint session. So that would be the first thing that hockey players should be looking to do every single week, as part of training sessions, as part of their warm-ups, as part of pre-game prep, every single week getting exposure to max effort sprinting. Now, the second thing that all hockey players should be looking to do is single leg strength training. The One of the most common problems I see is hockey players only doing bilateral lifting, so doing traditional deadlifting, back squatting, which is fine, and it's important to have built a base of max effort strength bilaterally. But you're never in a bilateral stance in hockey. You're always in a unilateral stance, whether that's running, changing direction, shooting, passing, tackling. You're always in a single leg stance. So it's important that we're training the body in that way and preparing for those sorts of demands. One of the things that a bilateral training will not necessarily identify or improve upon is any asymmetries that might exist or differences between your left and your right side. Whereas single leg work can quite quickly identify if there's an imbalance. And imbalances can cause injury risk. We know from research that if you've got significant asymmetry, there's a risk of injury. Obviously, the weaker side can be put under greater load relatively. Secondly, it's going to reduce performance because you're not going to be as strong on one side than the other. So if a team you're playing against can recognize that if you turn you one way, you're not as quick as the other, they're going to use that as a tactical advantage. But if you're balanced and you're able to be effective, turning left, turning right, being able to accelerate off of both legs, that's going to give you a massive tactical advantage as well on the pitch. So not only is there injury risk, there's also a performance perspective, and there's also a tactical advantage to being effective on both sides as well. So things like split squats, rear foot elevated split squats, lunge patterns, single leg pressing, any movements like that are going to be effective for targeting the development of strength through both individual limbs rather than bilaterally, where you might mask this asymmetry because you're going to be pushing through one side more than the other. In terms of how that would look, again, as a minimum, usually 2 strength sessions per week is recommended, but 3 ideally in the off season and periods where you've got more time to do so. And things like 3 to 4 sets per single leg strength exercise, looking at 5 to 8 reps per side, and usually about 70 to 80% of 1RM as a ballpark figure is a good place to start if you're trying to develop that single leg strength. So that could be an example. In your first session of the week, you're going to be doing something like a barbell rear foot elevated split squat, 4 sets of 5 on each side at 80% of 1RM. The second session of the week, going to do some reverse lunges, 3 sets of 8 per side at 70% of 1RM, as an example. So that'd be 2 ways you could incorporate good single leg development. Now, within single leg development, you've obviously want to incorporate plyometric training as well. So things like single leg pogos, hops, multi-directional hops and jumps off of a single leg, also super, super key. So try to incorporate that into warm-ups as well as your main session of the week in the gym, and you'll be in a really, really good place to develop that single leg strength as well. As a marker, if you've got more than a 10% difference between strength on one side versus the other, then that's a good opportunity to reduce that down to within 5 to 10%. So if you, for example, could do 100 kilos on one leg, which would be very, very strong, let's say on a single leg press, and you could do only 80 on the other leg, well, that's a 20% difference. So there's obviously a significant risk of injury there. So we're going to really bring that other leg up so you can reduce that down to a 5 to 10% difference, where you'd be able to be lifting at least 90 to 95 kilos in the opposite limb, which would balance it out. Again, that's very strong. So just take that with a pinch of salt. I'm not trying to say that's a strength standard, but that's just to give you a simple example. Number 3, finally, is mobility and making sure that you're mobile through the hip, ankle, and thoracic spine primarily. The key reasons for this is that the sport of hockey is going to demand low positions. It's very rotational. And if you don't have mobility through those areas of the body, then other body parts are going to be put under greater amount of stress, because stress is the amount of force divided by the cross-sectional area over which that force is applied. The less range you can produce, the more force in a small area is going to be tolerated or experienced. So in the ankle, for example, if you've got not a lot of dorsiflexion, so you can't get into your toes to shin, then the challenge there is you're going to get more stress going through your ankle joint because you can't dissipate the load over a greater range of motion. So super, super key. Again, mobility 2, 3, maybe even 4 times a week. You can do this very, very consistently, and that's going to help to develop these ranges of motion which support your ability to be effective on the pitch and not get caught out by unplanned change in direction or having to get into really low positions. And again, we know from injury reporting, injury data, that the lower back, the knee, and the ankle are very, very key injury sites. So if you're not able to be effective through range in these different areas, you're going to put those tissues under load and lots of stress as well. So just making sure those 3 key areas, sprinting every week, single leg strength work every week, mobility every week, it's going to be a really, really good foundation for developing those key physical qualities to make you a better hockey player as well.